So in this particular lesson, we're going to discuss MediatR, and I just want to refer back to the clean architecture diagram from Uncle Bob that we looked at earlier on and see how it applies to us in this particular section of the course. The different circles here and how it maps to our particular application, the entities in our case is our domain project, the use cases is our application project, and the controllers and presenters represent our API project. And these different areas or circles of our application represent different areas of software. And in general, the further in you go, the higher level the software becomes. And Uncle Bob describes this as the outer circles are mechanisms and the inner circles are policies. And the rule that makes this architecture work is the dependency rule. And this rule says that source code dependencies can only point inwards. Nothing in an inner circle can know anything at all about something in an outer circle. And in particular, the name of something declared in an outer circle must not be mentioned by the code in an inner circle. In other words, our application project has zero knowledge of what's going on in our API. Our use cases know nothing about our controllers. But our controllers can execute code inside our use cases. But from our use cases, we need to return an object to our controllers in the API. And what we want to concentrate on is this area in the bottom right-hand corner of this particular diagram. And this is where MediatR comes in. And the idea of MediatR is it takes an object in, handles it, does some logic processing on it, and spits an object out. And if we map these to the flow of control diagram that's included with this clean architecture, then we see the flow of control inside here. It begins in the controller, it moves through the use case, and then winds up executing in the presenter. And just to clarify what we're doing here, our API controllers are going to use the mediator.send function to pass an object to our MediatR handler. Our handler is going to process some logic and send out an object. And if we take a look at an example of, say for instance, creating an activity, we'll pass in the properties of this particular object. In terms of an activity, it might have a title and a date. In between the object in and the object out is going to be our handler logic. And this is going to create a new activity, save the new activity to the database. And so that our API controllers are aware that this has been successful, we'll return a special mediator object called unit, and we'll pass that back to our API controller. And once our API controller receives this, it knows the request has been successful, and it'll send out the appropriate HTTP response to the client, and typically this is going to be a 200 request. And this would be an example of our command handler. And if we take a look at a query handler, and let's say for this particular example, we're getting an activity. We'll need to know the ID of the activity, and that will be passed in as the object properties that we pass into our mediator handler. Then we'll process the logic inside this handler, and we'll go and get the activity from the database with the ID of 3. If the activity does not exist, then we want to return from our handler and not our API controller to tell the client that the activity doesn't exist. We'll need to deal with that kind of circumstance when we come on to error handling. But for now, if an entity doesn't exist, then we're just going to throw exceptions for the time being. If the activity is found, then we want to convert this from an entity into something that we can pass back to the client. And typically we'll use data transfer objects to do this. And then we'll return our activity DTO. And this will be the object out. So MediatR is going to give us a way to interact with our application project from our API project and allow our application project to return an object to our API, which it can then use to send to the client. And that's how the system is going to work. But the best way to see a system like this is by actually using it. So what we're going to do next is actually implement this pattern that we've been talking about.